Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the third session in our series about M&A in advisor practices, with a particular focus today on growth and valuation. As we went through the first two sessions, one of the big questions that I got asked by a number of advisors was, we understand the process, we understand what to do, but if I'm thinking of selling my business, or if I'm evaluating a business, how do I maximize the valuation of that practice? What are the things that really go into valuation, and what do I do to optimize for valuation and growth of my business? In support of this, we did a bunch of research. One of the things that we really leaned on, and we'll go into a number of charts, was a survey that was done by Schwab in the United States that looked at the top drivers of value for top performing firms. And we'll go into that and understand what it takes to achieve those things and how to think about your practice in that way. We'll go through a couple different topics today. One is balancing the objectives within your organization as you think about valuation and you think about what you want to achieve. The second is measuring success, looking at the key metrics that we have seen really impact valuation, impact the multiples, whether in the public markets and as a full independent, or even if you're working within a broker-dealer, how do you optimize for value? How do you craft that value in your business so that you can capture it day to day, and then eventually an equity value when you determine to exit? Managing delivery and capacity within your business to deliver that. And then finally, a few last takeaways. So we'll go through that. Certainly, if you have questions, feel free to enter them. We'll watch out for those. We'll probably hold off on answering them till the end of the session, but we'll make sure we address all of your questions and things that you are interested in. So as you start to think about your business as a business, move away from sort of the practice itself, but start to think about it as a CEO. It's going to change the mindset and focus of things that you're looking at. And so why do we say changing that mindset? Well, valuation is really of a business. And so what are the things that are important to enhance that business and looking at the business overall? So we think there's four key things that you really need to focus on. One is changing from a view just on revenue to one that also includes profitability. How do you deliver on that revenue, and how do you maximize the value that comes from it? At the end of the day, any business is based on the value of its cash flows. And if you can deliver that revenue and the revenue growth more profitably, you're going to increase the cash flows coming out of it and increase the profitability and increase the equity value of your business. The second is to think about equity versus cash flow. So when you're optimizing for the long-term value of your business, you're going to make different decisions versus optimizing for cash flow year to year. So if your primary focus is on take-home income, that's not always going to be what's going to actually help you optimize for the long-term value of your business, of your practice, of your company. So for example, if you are under-investing in marketing, that may improve your day-to-day cash flow, but that's going to slow your long-term growth and ultimately the value of your practice. The third is thinking about the team goals versus individual targets. How do you get your team to help drive your valuation? One of the fundamental differences in terms of valuation when someone comes and looks at it is, am I buying a single person or am I buying a business? And where the team is actually all aligned and taking action to drive results, there's going to be greater value in the business. And finally, moving from personal management to team management. Are you really getting the most out of everyone on your team? Are you actually maximizing the value of your inputs? This is key. When you think about the advisor business, it is based on human capital. And your ability to increase the value of that human capital has impact on your overall valuation. It's not just about managing yourself and what you do. It's starting to build scale in your business and get scale for what you do, which means investing in people and building out talent, which lets you to actually increase the revenue per professional and the overall scale of your business. So as I mentioned, Schwab did a survey last year, actually it was earlier this year, that talked to all of the firms on their platform and really looked for the differentiators. And so they started by saying, like, what does a top performing firm look like in terms of growth, asset flows, clients, all of those key factors? And essentially the top performing firms, and we'll talk about what makes a top performing firm in the coming slides, is about 2 to 3 times better at what they do, whether it's revenue, asset flows, clients, and client growth, than a typical firm. So they actually accelerate their growth. And when you think about that compounding over multiple years, it has huge impacts for the business. And it's been consistent for the past 5 years in terms of the range of difference in the range of AUM growth that they see in that business, and the incremental value that people get, that they get into their business by focusing on the right factors. So one of the things that we say is you really have to start by looking at the objectives and decision-making within the business and balancing those objectives, balancing the short term with the long term, balancing the needs of individuals versus the team, understanding what your goals are from a values perspective and what everyone in the team values versus maximizing short-term profitability. So really spending time getting alignment across team members and the leaders of the team to understand what the purpose and the goals of the business are. Those will become important as you start to think about your strategies going forward and how you execute them. So as a business, are you trying to optimize for revenue growth? Are you trying to optimize for profitability? Are you trying to optimize for, you want to grow, but you don't want to add any staff? There's advisors I've talked to who are a 3 or 4 person team, and they say, I want to keep growing, but I don't want to add any staff. And as a result, they might have to actually basically trade out clients and increase in the average revenue per client. There are other firms that we work with that want to work with every client that they can and are willing to give up some profitability because it's too important for them to be in their communities and to be working with all those people. Each firm is going to make its own decisions. They're going to determine what's right for them and how they need to think about working. But having an alignment, having those clearly stated, avoid some of the confusion in a business. They avoid some of the resources being put into the wrong place. They avoid some of the frustration that happens when people are making decision-making or thinking about their decision-making based on different factors. So where does value creation start? It really starts with defining the mission and vision, having real clarity on where the business is going and what you want to achieve. Why does that matter? It matters because it helps you determine what the value proposition is for your clients and ensure that you're investing in the right things that drive the most value. One example I always like to give is if you think of 2 of the top diamond sellers, one is Walmart, the other is Tiffany's. They both focus on selling diamonds. They both try and do that as profitably as possible, but their value proposition is very different. Their businesses are both incredibly successful. But if they actually start crossing over, if Tiffany's tried to do things the way and cut costs the way that Walmart does, or if Walmart started to put in some of the experience that Tiffany's did, it wouldn't work for them. You have to think about your practice the same way. What is important to your clients? What does your target client look like? What is the value proposition that matters to them? What are their expectations on meetings? What are their expectations on communications? What are their expectations on response times? And how do you build the business around that and think about that? Having clarity on that up front, having real understanding of this is what we want to do as a business, this is who we want to help and how we want to help them, this is how we think about advice, all of those things philosophically allow you then to construct the value proposition and construct your business model in a way that maximizes value for you. So we talked about this sort of setting your mission and vision. This ties to setting a business plan. Top performing firms have strong clarity in their business of what their strategic plan is and what their succession plan is. And we'll talk a little bit more about succession planning later. But why is that so important? Why are both of these things so important? The written strategic plan is clear. We understand why that's important. It ensures, as we just talked about, that there's clarity in what the value proposition is. There's clarity in the mission and vision of what you're trying to accomplish. There's clarity on the trade-offs that you're making. How important is growth? How important is profitability? How important is relationship with clients? All of those things, once stated, improves alignment of everyone in the business and ensure that everyone's rowing in the right direction and pushing their business forward. Now, what about succession plans? Well, once again, that's important for clarity. People want to know what their role is in the organization long term. And once again, successful businesses become successful businesses because they move beyond the individual. If you're just buying a practice, if you're just buying an individual, the value is tied to that person being there. On the other hand, if there is clarity on who is taking over, on where the business is going, how actually the systems will succeed the individual, the value of that practice increases significantly, 2 or 3 times even, when there's actually clarity on where that's going to go. One of the first questions that we recommend people asking is when they're looking at acquisition, what is the intent of the leadership? Who's planning on stepping out? What's going to stay? And so understanding that with a succession plan is real core to creating value. So the next thing is, what are the metrics that we want to think about in evaluating our business? So when we start to think about evaluating a business from a valuation perspective and from a M&A perspective in terms of how much will I pay for a business, there's 5 factors that we think are core to thinking about the value of that business. The first is, what is the revenue per client? Revenue per client is an indicator of the value that you're creating, right? How much is that client spending to spend time with you, right? What do they think your advice is worth? And obviously, the more that you can drive that up, that's going to increase and indicate the value. The second is, what's the revenue per employee? So you identify, obviously you're getting revenue. That's great. What is your cost to deliver that revenue, right? How much does it cost me to deliver value to my clients? Now, obviously, the first and second things are going to be tied together. Firms that are able to drive higher revenue per client, higher value experiences, are going to invest in people. They're going to invest in talent, right? And they're going to be able to drive more revenue per employee, which is going to drive profitability. Other businesses that may try and actually touch more clients, but offer a more basic level of service, might get lower revenue per employee. And as a result, might think about their servicing levels differently. The third is staffing levels. What does it take for me to deliver my experience, right? That's going to drive profitability. I'm going to be able to look at my costs. I'm going to look at my revenue and see what is the profitability of the business. The third key indicator that we think is a key matter for success is looking at client turnover rates or client retention rates. How long does the client stay with you in a relationship? Are they seeing value? Are there issues that are happening that are causing clients to leave? Typically, as I think we've talked about before, businesses that are not succeeding will start to see increased issues with retention. Why? Because the principals might be outgoing doing acquisition, but they don't have the business systems in place to back them up when they're not in the room. The net result is you see a lot of turnover. You might see a lot of growth of new clients, right? You might even see revenue growth. But if clients are leaving, if you think about your biggest cost as an advice business, the biggest cost is always going to be on the acquisition side. And if you have to ramp up that acquisition to make up for lost clients, then that's going to impact your profitability. Now, that doesn't mean client turnover has to be at 0. You're going to make a decision over time about which clients are right for you, right? And there are some clients that may no longer be right for your business model, and you're going to offload them. And that's okay. That's not a problem. You want to be able to explain where you are from a turnover perspective. But really looking at that and making sure that you're retaining your clients. And then finally, revenue and asset growth, right? Are you getting the growth in your business? Either you're out and acquiring new clients or doing other inorganic strategies to acquire, and what's happening to your existing. So if client turnover is low, the amount of acquisition you're going to have to do is less. If turnover is higher, obviously you're going to have to make that up on the acquisition side. And so a successful business, an successful practice will have the systems running so that the advisor can be the rainmaker that they want to be and go and focus on revenue growth without impacting the client turnover, right? This is where all of the different pieces are going to play together. And you're going to have to look at those things and how they're playing. You're going to look at your staffing levels and your staffing turnover. You're going to look at your revenue per employees. Are you driving that up over time? And if you see those trends, that's going to increase the relative valuation. These are all going to be factors that are going to act as multiples to drive up the relative valuation, all things being equal. And so focusing on strategies that can improve those. So if you think about increasing revenue per client and revenue per staff, that focuses on enhancing the client experience. Value perception leads to higher fees. It leads to referrals and it leads to retention. So often, we have conversations with advisors who say, what should I be charging for my services? And I think it's important to take a step back and say, what services am I offering my clients? And what is the value of those services? Think about it from a value perspective versus just benchmarking on fees. What is my value? How am I delivering it? How often am I meeting with my clients? There was an advisor I worked with who charged a fixed fee to start with. Basically said it's going to be $50,000 a year to work with me. Seemed like a really high number when I talked to him. But when he talked about his businesses and his expectation was a client met with him in person for half a day to 1 day per year, plus had a series of other in-person meetings. The only way he could afford to deliver that level of service was to actually price it quite a high rate. And clients were very clear on what value he was providing and what that cost was. You should be able to articulate that out, articulate very specifically what's the value that you're giving and what is the value of that to the client. Understanding your ideal client profile and experience. So creating a high value experience, something that costs $50,000 when your average client's going to have $200,000 in assets, doesn't make a lot of sense. But thinking through, what is my client profile? Who do I like working with who do I like working with? And how do I deliver service to them? Right? And ensuring the right value for the right clients. And we'll talk about segmentation in a second, but you can service different tiers of clients. You just have to calibrate that service appropriately to them. And once again, that gets back to your decisions about your values, about your mission and vision, about what you want to do as a business, and thinking through that holistically. Really working through that conversation. Once you determine what it is that you want to offer, it then becomes a question about how do you want to deliver it, right? And so starting with the concept of efficient delivery and capacity. The biggest challenge that we see with advisors today is freeing up capacity to support growth. How do you get at that? It starts with an efficient client experience, right? Really thinking through, what does it cost me to serve the client, and spending the time walking through that process. Understanding where there are bottlenecks, where there are clients that might be inappropriate for the delivery that you're doing, where staff members are causing challenge, where you need to bring in technology, right? Is it in onboarding? Is my onboarding process efficient and fast? Am I responding to clients quickly? Do I have access to the information I need to know about their accounts? Am I getting bottlenecked on admin or money movement? What are the things that can reduce my cost to serve? And really identifying someone in your business, whether it's you or someone else, who's focusing on, how do I reduce the cost to serve at the same level and quality that I've been doing before. Leading businesses, whether they're advisor businesses or any businesses, are constantly re-engineering and looking at their business process and saying, how do I free up some capacity? It may mean letting go of some clients that don't make sense. It may be adjusting your service model. It may be outsourcing certain things to other people. It might be looking at your investment management process and saying, how do I make this more efficient? Am I spending too much time on certain activities or spending too much effort on others that really aren't the things that drive value for the client? And if you really want to get at this, I would spend time talking to your clients. Ask them why they work with you. If a client says, I work with you because of your investment management, you want to be focused on that. If a client says, I work with you because of the relationship and the advice that you give me, and doesn't doesn't mention investment management, you really want to think about where you're spending your time relative to that. Making sure that you're spending time on the things that you do best, and also that you're bringing in people to support you. If you aren't good at running the operations of your business, that's not where you should spend time. You actually should have someone who does that for you. That should take time, that should give time back to you to actually focus on growth. So making sure that you have the right talent for the right roles. If you look at strategies to create efficiency, top performing firms spend around 20% less time annually per client on operations, and about 10% more time on client service. So they are actively looking at ways to reduce their operational toil and taking that time and not reducing headcount, but reinvesting that in client service, right? The more time that you can spend facing the client, either to develop deeper relationships or to develop new relationships, is going to benefit your business. And you can see that those top firms are working aggressively to re-engineer their processes, identify ways to reduce their cost to serve, and increasing the number of clients per professional that they serve and the AUM per professional. So going back to the metrics that we saw, that if you can reduce your client service cost, you're going to actually help yourself with client acquisition and assets per clients. And so how do you do that? And how do you measure that, right? Are you setting metrics in your business to identify what those opportunities are? Are you getting support to actually measure that cost from your broker dealer or wherever that is? Whether you're out on your own or working with another team, are they putting in place strategies that help you become more efficient? Or are they actually just downloading costs to you that end up slowing you down? And so if you're seeing those investments in technology, that's great. You should see the results from that in terms of operational efficiency. We continue to focus on how do you help advisors think about their business and improve efficiency to free up time and space so they can focus on driving AUM and driving client acquisition. Client segmentation. This is a topic that, for a lot of people, some people believe in it strongly. Some people feel like all clients, they need to treat all clients equally. It's certainly a decision that each firm has to make based on their values and what's important to them. What I will say is top performing firms segment at a higher level. They also think about those segments and what is the appropriate level of service and support to them. So it's not a matter of not servicing different segments. You actually can service multiple segments. And it's not a matter of providing appropriate level of service to the appropriate segment. It just means that you don't provide the exact same segment service to every segment. The client that's doing $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in billings with you likely needs a different level of support than someone that only can afford $2,000 or $3,000. It's not that the $2,000 or $3,000 is bad. You shouldn't look at it that way. You have to look at it as what is actually the value that you can provide them within that, because that's what they're going to expect. And managing those expectations is really important, and thinking about your strategy with this. Actively taking the time with your team too to communicate and make sure you understand this. This is one of the number one places that I find that there's misalignment in firms that we've worked with. The staff may not fully understand the segmentation strategy and are over-servicing clients who are actually lower value. Now, that causes a couple problems. It means that the staff is frustrated because usually they're not getting through all their work in the day. It means higher value clients are frustrated because they're not getting the responsiveness that they need. And usually leads the practice leader frustrated because they're seeing the profitability, they're seeing their cost to deliver go up, and it's really impacting their net business results. Talent development and inorganic growth strategies. So I think it's really important to think about your talent development and how that impacts your profitability. So thinking about the people on your team, how are you acquiring them? How are you developing them? And how are you retaining them? The top firms are putting plans in place to help build the talent of their people. Their people are the ones that ends up being the capacity that actually enables inorganic growth. It lets the advisor go out and focus on growth activities. It creates the system to actually put on new assets and ensure that you're maximizing profitability. It's also important to understand the importance of it's also important to understand the value of a succession plan and practice valuation, as I mentioned earlier. Buyers want to know that they're bringing in talent. So if I'm buying a practice, if I'm buying an advisor and their relationships, that value is going to be lower than if I'm buying a firm that has relationships, because I know that the firm will retain those clients, even if the individual advisor moves away. And even more, if that firm has a unique way of doing business that can be scaled, that is even more valuable. So really understanding how those things layer up and how they impact your value as a business. So if you look at the top firms, right, the top performing firms are more active in developing compelling work, thinking about teamwork, communicating the plan to clients, developing a career path, really being clear with their people of what their role is in the organization and where that's going to go over time. Most people will choose a job based on, is it a rewarding job over compensation? Compensation they can always get. They will always maximize compensation. But if you're helping them grow as an individual, if you make them feel part of what's happening, if they have clarity on the vision and the dream of what you are building, they're going to be more bought in, more compelled to do great things and help spur the growth of your business. Really understanding that partnership and the importance is one of the key differences that we see between individual advisors that do well and high-performing practices that scale and grow and create long-term value. So really spending the time to say, how do I think about my employees and the talent on my team? I've worked within broker dealer experience environments where the advisor sort of looks at the firm as being responsible for developing their team. And I would really encourage advisors to take a step back from that, because they are the ones, you as the advisor are the one who benefits the most by having an aggressive plan to develop your talent. And they will connect with you over the long term. And you want to make sure that those are tight relationships between you and your team. Teams that are committed are the ones that lead to innovation. They lead to ones to success and really help the business grow. Establishing growth priorities. So really understanding where you want to go and how you want to grow the business, and taking the time each year to say, what are my objectives, right? How do I see this unfolding in the next year? And how does that fit into my long-term objectives? So if your goal is to get to 500 million, if your goal is to get to $1 billion, if your goal is to get to 2 billion, whatever it is, you've got to break that goal out into annual objectives and then determine what is your plan to achieve that. So if you want to grow by $20 million and 10 million, it's going to be through client acquisition and 10 million is going to be through organic. You have to break that up into a set of work, right? What are the market activities to get $10 million? If your average client size is $1 million, that means that you have to acquire 10 clients. How many engagements do you have to have with prospects to get to 10 clients? Map that out over the year. Where you are specific on your plan, where you are specific in the activities that you are taking, you are more likely to achieve that. On the inorganic side, if you're trying to grow by 20, 30, $40 million, how many targets is that going to take? How many conversations? How many leads? Knowing those numbers and knowing that waterfall and being somewhat data-driven, it doesn't have to be a complex model. It just means having 2 or 3 metrics in your head that says, okay, our expectation as a business is we are going to acquire 2 clients per month. Each month with the team then going through, what actions are we taking to acquire those 2 clients? What's working and what's not? There will be months where you don't hit the number. That's okay. You would then want to take the time to sit down and say, what worked, what didn't, what do we change? The firms that aren't measuring that regularly fall behind. They really do. And they are the ones that I've talked to that year after year say we want to grow by 25 million, but generally are static. New client growth. If you look at where that growth comes from in most firms, it is being driven by client acquisition, right? If you think about deepening with your existing clients and you think about you're going to have some level of attrition from retiring clients who are drawing down, you have to refill that by acquiring a number of clients per year and building assets. Top performing firms, they're doing $30 to $35 million in new asset growth a year. That's a big number when you think about it on a monthly basis, right? That's $3 million a month. If you're averaging, if you're doing, $1 million, that's 3 to 4 clients per month that you're thinking about. Do you have a tactical plan to work through that and determine how you're going to get there? As I said, you're not going to always get there every month, but if you're thinking about a plan, are you thinking about, I want to actually grow my average asset size? Okay, how are you going to do that? What does that look like? Some firms say, I don't want to grow at all in terms of my staff, but I want to grow my assets. I'm only going to acquire clients who are above my average asset size. And every time I add a client, or every 10 clients that I add, I'm actually going to drop 20 clients. I'm going to sell them off, or I'm going to hand them off to another advisor. Lots of different strategies for working through it, but really understanding what your growth is and understanding how you're building that engine for growth. As I've worked with clients over the years, we see key inflection points in the business. We see it 100 million, we see it 250 million, we see it 500 million, where advisors start to really plateau. They get frustrated. They don't see the growth that they want to get. And that's because at each of those plateau points, you've got to stop and say, why am I not growing? What's going on in my business system that's not allowing me to grow? And usually you'll break it apart and you'll see either it's heightened attrition or slowing acquisition. Why? Because you as a leader aren't always there to fix the problems, either on the acquisition side or on the retention side. And you've got to revisit your business processes and make sure that they're efficient and enable you to focus on the growth engine. And so this, this is how the pieces connect through what we've talked about. If you don't have an efficient delivery model, it makes it hard to focus on acquisition. If you don't have efficient acquisition, it doesn't allow you to grow. So really understanding how all those pieces tie in your business and really thinking through them. Referrals. Interestingly, referrals account for a majority of new clients. Every advisor I know knows this inherently. What I find interesting is the number of firms who have a documented referral program for existing clients and for businesses is less than 50%. Even top performing firms, it's not that high. But what we know is when you document and articulate what you're going to do, your team, right, your people are more successful doing it. You are more successful at doing it. This isn't about like writing a long book, writing endless pages on, how you're going to do acquisition, how much acquisition. It's more about just articulating what are the 2 or 3 strategies that you have in place. How are you engaging with clients? Are you doing events? Are you asking them at meetings? Are you doing client bring a friend events? Are you creating a board of clients that can help refer to you or help talk to you about how you think about your marketing activities? All of these things are activities that you take, and documenting with your team how to think about referrals. How do you think about your staff asking for referrals? There are places where actually it doesn't have to be you doing client acquisition. A lot of people think about it from an incentive standpoint. So they'll just put in place the incentive program, but actually putting in the steps and the processes. Are you training your staff? Are you thinking about places to put in questions? Are you asking clients when they attend meetings with you? Are you asking for those opportunities? So really working that into your business. So all of those things I think are important to think about as you think about valuation. The firms that create the most equity value, right? Let's go back to some of the key messages. The firms that create the most equity value are those that have key strategic objectives and a vision. Their team knows where they want to go. They know where they want to go. They can clearly articulate the value proposition of the business. They can clearly articulate the target client and how they're going to acquire that target client. Having that identified to ensure that all of the resources are being used to drive maximum value for what they want to achieve. And once again, maximum value is going to be different by firm. It's going to be different by firm, and you have to articulate it. That maximum value could be defined by profitability. It could be defined by helping clients achieve their goals. It could be defined by making a contribution to your community. That's up to you. But what you have to make sure is your whole team is aligned on that vision and where you're going. The second key thing is, are there key processes? Have you identified and built out your process maps in the business that allows you to deliver, that allows you to run the business efficiently? Right? Vision, values, that's telling you where you're going. The processes are how you get there, right? That's going to help you ensure that you're doing it in a way that's profitable for your business. The third is, there a talent plan to deliver on the efficient processes? Are you helping your people move up the curve? Why does that matter? It matters because they're able to, when they excel, they can deliver more value to your clients, they can handle more clients, and they stay longer with your business. There is nothing worse to a business than losing a top client or a top employee. When that employee leaves, it takes months to replace them and months to train them up, and often you're not successful in it. So really having a plan to maximize what you get from your team is essential. So we've talked about driving revenue. We've talked about driving revenue per client and making sure you're driving revenue per employee and that you're maintaining staffing levels and avoiding staff turnover. Fourth is establishing and tracking key metrics. What are your goals for your business? Write them down and revisit them regularly. You can't achieve anything if you're not measuring it. And take the time. That doesn't mean like be hard on yourself. It doesn't mean get, overly disappointed when you have some bad months. It does mean saying, do I need to change my tactics and my actions to achieve what I want to say? It's great to say you want to grow by 20%. It's great to say you want to grow to 500 million. But if you don't break that down into sub goals, it's really hard to achieve it. And there's lots of writing out there about how businesses that break down their goals are more successful. Take that time and think about what are the goals that you're trying to achieve. 2 or 3 for the business. Most businesses can only track 2 or 3 metrics. Pick your 2 or 3 and then track them, monitor them, and hold yourself and your team accountable to problem solve when you're not hitting them the way that you want. And then finally, determine what your growth objectives are in your growth plan, whether organic through marketing, client acquisition, referrals, all of those activities, or inorganic. Really determine what your strategy is. And we've talked about this before on the inorganic side, making sure that you have clarity of what your goal is and what your plan is. It keeps coming back to that. Really having some stated goals, stated activities, and making sure you're happy to them. All of these things will impact value. I have seen the difference in terms of the value to practices. And we've seen that in terms of multiples. If you're just buying, a simple practice that has doesn't have business processes, has an advisor who acquired some assets, but doesn't have a real plan for growth, the multiple is going to be half of what it is for a business that's thriving, for a business that has growth, that has clear and demonstrated profitability, and a clear and demonstrated way and plan to show how they're achieving that growth and how they're achieving that profitability. That makes big difference to you over the long term. That may mean in the short term that it costs you. That may mean investment. That may mean impact to cash flow. That may slow growth for a year or two as you actually transition to a place to create that growth engine. But once you do, over the long term, the equity value that you create is going to be tremendous. Let me stop and see if there are any questions. You can certainly enter them into the chat. Someone asked about whether we can get a copy of the PowerPoint. We will have this presentation available for participants. Any other questions? Okay, if there's not, I want to thank you all for taking the time. Certainly, if you're interested in talking more about selling or buying a practice, about positioning your business to maximize that value, I'd be happy to follow up. We have 1 or 2 questions. Do you have suggestions on how to transition unproductive staff out of the business? Let me start with that one. Unproductive staff is a really important question, right? There's nothing worse to a business that is more negatively impactful than someone who is bringing negative energy, who the staff is looking at. What I would say is, first, you have to ask the question, is it a talent issue or is it a development issue? If it's a development issue, you actually want to give someone a chance to grow. You want to actually make sure they understand, right, what's wrong and what they're not doing well, and give direct feedback to them. Be very clear on what hasn't gone right and what they need to change, and use examples. It's in some ways, it's easy to just get rid of people and think you can replace them. That's not always the case. You actually want to try and develop. There's not enough done in this industry in terms of development, and making sure that you have done what is necessary to help grow this person. Do you have one-on-ones with them? Do you have a mentor who's coaching them? Now, if after going through that process, if after the process of giving feedback, trying to cure the result, of giving them a mentor, of giving them extra coaching, of giving them clarity in their role, that you haven't seen any type of improvement, then you're able to take action. And so you're able to transition them out. And it's actually, if you've actually gone through the activities and articulated to the employee the activities you've done to improve them and how that hasn't succeeded, then it's a conversation about what's best for both of you, right? If they're not succeeding in the business, they probably don't want to be there. Help them actually realize that there's a need for transition, give them a period to transition out, and move on to better things for both of you. So I think those are, both important. Do I have specific examples of how businesses have grown? It's a good question. We see lots of different ways, right? Businesses grow in many different ways. So, I'll talk to a couple practices that I know. I think the firms that we see that grow the best, one, they've articulated a very clear value proposition to their clients and targeted clients that match that value proposition that best. And why is that important? Because clients that don't fit your value proposition tend to take a lot of time and energy from your staff and take away from you for growing the business. On the other hand, when you have clients who fit your value proposition, it allows you to reinvest in them and create value and really think about the story. So I talk about an advisor in northeastern Massachusetts and New England. They focused on a clients with families with special needs. That's all they worked with. And as a result, they were able to build an annual conference. They had the best people who provided accounting help for them. They had the best people from the medical profession. They had people, all sorts of people. And anyone who had children with special needs wanted to be there. And they wanted to refer their friends. It absolutely helped them grow the business. There's an advisor I worked with who only focused on young surgeons. That was his value proposition. It was very focused, but he knew those people and he knew what their needs were. He knew that they needed insurance early on because of the way that their income worked. And he could bring a full story to them. Once again, that drove referrals. And he also, over time, grew with those doctors and were able to meet their needs as they grew their asset level and transition the offering. Every advisor I know who has been good at growth has been very good at having a focused value proposition and clarity on that value proposition. And the second, continuously created the capacity for growth in their business. In terms about merging, right? Merging a business is not much different than acquisition. It's about, to me, that is about expectations. The biggest challenge in merging two businesses of similar size are both sides understanding and have clarity on expectation. Because how you make decisions as an individual advisor is going to be different than as an individual team. Is one person taking lead and making the final decision, or is it both people? Are you changing roles and responsibilities in the organization? Do you have alignment on pricing, right? Do you have alignment on investment strategy? Do you have alignment on target client? Are all of those things true? Is one person expecting to exit at some point, or are you both expecting to stay? So each of those things have to be worked through. When you're acquiring, you get to define the strategy going forward. You're going to want to communicate it and make sure the person coming in is clear with it. But when you're merging as equals, really spending the time on expectations and roles and responsibilities is so important to getting it right. Can I talk about practices for sale being priced currently? So practice pricing is all over the place. I've seen it as low as 1 times revenue. I've seen it as high as 3 to 4 times. And I've seen it higher for firms over $1 billion or $2 billion that have a demonstrated business model and are able to show the profitability. I've shown that higher. I've seen that higher. What are the factors that drive that valuation? As I talked about earlier, firms that have higher revenue growth, consistent revenue growth, are going to get a higher multiple and higher valuation. Firms that have consistent business systems are going to have higher valuation. Firms that have deeper relationships with clients are going to have a relatively higher valuation. I think, in most cases, and we've talked about this in previous webinars, you're going to want to think about the 3 different components of the valuation. What are you paying up front? What are you paying over time? And what are you paying contingent on growth? If the firm that's being acquired is willing to take more risk and have some of the price be paid based on contingent results, you can push that price up there. Talking about transition an older advisor out of the business. This is a really important conversation in today's market. We see lots of older advisors who are thinking about exit plans. And I think there's 2 ways to think about it. Some are looking to sell their business. They want to sell and step out immediately. And that is certainly a way to work through it. That can be much more clear, because it's clear that you're taking over the business. You want to make sure that you have proper runway for them to introduce you to the client, to develop the relationship for the client, all of those things. But that's quite straightforward. The other side of it is what is called a sell and stay strategy, right? Or sell and serve. I'm going to sell my business, and now I'm going to continue to serve my clients. I actually have reached a point in my career where I don't want to be the one to think about the business. I don't want to be the one to think about growth. I don't want to be the one to think about managing accounting and the regulator and all these different things. I just want to continue to service my clients. It's actually a very attractive strategy for both sides. Once again, as long as expectations are clear on both sides. And what do I mean by that? Well, if the older advisor has always thought of themselves as the decision maker in the business, if they're selling and going through a longer transition, they now have to be clear that they're no longer the decision maker. That's okay, but it has to be clear. And saying, that, final decisions on pricing, final decisions on investment management, final decisions on risk to the business are no longer them as the final decision. They will have input. You will listen to them, like that's important, but they have to understand that the role is changing. I think it also is important for them to think about what is the timeline and how are they going to transition the client relationships. If it's done right, the client becomes connected to the firm and not to the advisor. It can actually create a lot more value than just handing off practices quickly. But there has to be a conversation about expectations and how the two of you are going to work together. Legacy issue, unwilling to retire, longstanding employment tenure that was inherited from previous advisor. Okay, so that is always an interesting challenge. You've got an employee who doesn't want to leave, an employee that has a sense of, belonging. It's a tough conversation, and this is one where you're going to want to get advice from either a legal and or HR firm to understand how you can make that transition. I think giving someone a runway is the best way to do it, giving them time to make the transition. But at some point, you have to be clear that if they're no longer right for the business, you are better off paying them to leave, paying a transition comp for them to step out. It's frustrating sometimes when you have to pay those dollars, but you have to look at the long-term impact in it. But I would sit down with someone who's more of an expert on the HR side on how you do that. But I think it's one of those things that it's having negative impact on your business. You're going to have to make that change. I've been an advisor for 31 years. While I bring good value to my clients, I'm finding that it's becoming increasingly difficult to get new referrals. I'm concerned that my clients feel I'm aging out, despite me telling them that I plan to remain with the business for at least 10 years. I am 61. This is a problem that a lot of advisors have, right? As you start to age and your clients look at you and say, 10 years, but I may want someone that I'm going to have a relationship for 20 or 25 years. You've got to think about your business structure in that case, right? And think about your succession plan. This is why succession planning can be so important. Bringing in a younger advisor to your team who people see you as a partner with. So there's an advisor I was working with in Calgary. He is not super far along in his career, but he's probably in the 50 to 60 range. He's realizing that he's thinking about his role differently, and his clients are thinking differently because they're thinking about their children. He's now brought on a younger advisor to his team and has been slowly bringing that person along, right? From an associate role to an advisor role to now that person is taking more ownership of the relationships and being seen as the key point person and seeing that the practice is in supporting them, not an individual advisor. And so he hasn't said to people, I'm stepping out of the business. He hasn't said to the people, I'm leaving in 10 years and so will be here. He's just said that we now have different roles and responsibilities, and I'm focused on X, and this person is focused on the relationship. I'll continue to be here at certain times. That's a perfect example of where you want to create the connection to the business and create a business by thinking about the succession plan instead of just creating a connection to you. That's how you can create value for yourself, by connecting it to other people in developing yourself as an organization instead of just developing yourself as an individual. Have you seen advisor business grow through marketing, or does that not tend to work on a larger scale? I've absolutely seen businesses that are tremendous at marketing, absolutely tremendous, and they grow. And it's got to be something that's very authentic to you. So there's an advisor I knew in Columbus, Ohio, Jeff Chaddock, who he had a big, vibrant personality. He ran 3 or 4 large events per year. All of his clients wanted to be there. They all wanted to bring people. It was, a big sort of thing. But that fit his personality. There are other advisors who, they focused on marketing to local accountants. It's a strategy that most people have heard about, but that's where they felt authentic. There's advisors I know that, just focus on referrals. They focus on their experience and have a very focused practice to get referrals, whether it's asking clients, whether it's doing client bring a friend events, whether it's celebrating birthdays and other special milestones for their clients and doing it on a basis of letting people bring friends. That's been successful for them. It absolutely can work on a larger scale. You just have to put the plan in place. In your experience acquiring smaller books without clear processes, what are retention rates of those clients post-acquisition? If your systems are efficient and running a quality practice, how much more effective are you in retaining those clients who were just acquired? So this is where having a really good process can actually allow you to create value. When you look at a smaller book that doesn't have process, but may have an attractive subset of clients, we find that if you actually bring that advisor in, right, if the advisor is part of the acquisition and engaged, and compensation is set up such that if there's growth and retention, they get paid, that not only does that advisor benefit, but also the clients benefit. And you can start actually getting scale. And it's a way to really create value because you've got the systems in place. You can actually capture that. You don't have to pay as much for those books. And you can make a lot of the compensation contingent on that person's performance over multiple years. If you are good at working with clients, you're going to be able to step in quickly and really talk to your value proposition. Because most of the challenge for advisors in growing is not going and acquiring. It's actually having the systems and the capacity to do it. If you've got the systems and capacity and someone's bringing to you a $5 million book, a $3 million book, a $12 million book, you're going to be able to work those clients well. You're going to be able to give them a good experience. Remember, most clients aren't going to rush away from you the moment you acquire them. They actually want to listen, right? Especially if the advisor's coming over at least for some period of time. If they see that you're delivering value, that you've got a good experience, they're going to buy it and want to stay. Inertia is actually your benefit in this case. It's just a matter of you demonstrating the value and how your processes work. About talent development. You talked about helping talents develop personally. Does it need to be professionally oriented? How do you help staff developing personally while also keeping professionally oriented? So it absolutely should be professional oriented. What I mean by personally, are you taking an individual and personal role in their development? What does that mean? That means, are you having 1, 2, 3 conversations a year about what their objectives are, where they want to get in their career, what drives them, right? Have you asked them what's most important to them? Is it financial gain? Is it giving back? Is it working with people? Is it growth, right? Understanding what's important to them and what are those drivers and how do those matter, and spending time on that. That to me is about developing a personal relationship and understanding who they are. Have you articulated 2 or 3 things really clearly that you think they should work on? Or more importantly, have you helped them identify themselves what 2 or 3 things they need to work on? And people can't work on that many things at a time. Are you then setting up regular touch points? Do you have weekly one-on-ones, quarterly one-on-ones, monthly one-on-ones to talk about not just what's going on in the business, but what's going on with how are they doing with the business? And are you finding them mentors? Are you finding other people that can help them grow? If you have a large practice, it might be someone in your practice. If you have a small practice, can you actually work with other practices in the area and create communities of interest, right? So if you know 2 or 3 other advisors, get a couple of the staff members together, pay for them to have lunch together once a month and talk about what's working and not in creating career development. Those are types of the things that you can do personally, but help them develop professionally. We all have clients who no longer align with the business. Do you have any thoughts on how to offload these clients to optimize for efficiency? If these clients are still in the book at acquisition, will this bring value down? So off-target clients, whatever you want to think about them, if it is during an acquisition, let me talk about it both within your business and during acquisition. At acquisition, my recommendation is if you're a buyer, discount those clients absolutely. Don't include them in the valuation as they shouldn't be there longer term. If you're a seller, I actually think that is important. You don't want very many off-target clients. That's not where you're spending time and getting the growth that you want. I think you want to have, a real conversation with the client to understand how they fit with your business. And if they don't fit with your business, explaining to them why they don't fit with their business and how they may be better served by another advisor. And then either finding that other advisor, or if they're better for a direct channel or whatever is appropriate for them. Most clients actually will welcome that. Now, there's going to be some that you're going to say, you know what, I need this person in here because of other relationships. And that's totally fine. You're always going to have clients that are connected in different ways. But if there are clients that are truly not target, having the conversation and really helping them identify why you're not right for them, I think is fine. You can also look at selling off the non-target to, a smaller advisor, or just giving it to them, right? Giving some advisor who's starting up 5 or 10 of your clients is not the worst thing, right? Help them get and grow, get your clients served better, and allow you to focus your capacity elsewhere. Talking about value of a practice, do you see value in brand, online presence, and lead flow? Or is it all down to recurring revenue and AUM? Inherently, brand itself, I don't think is that valuable. It is what the brand delivers. Same with online presence and lead flow. Is that turning into revenue growth? So if the lead flow results in client acquisition and you're seeing that acquisition, then brand matters. But just saying you have a brand that you can't demonstrate how that's impacting asset growth, revenue per client, higher fees, all of those things, in and of itself, I would say I don't think it's a huge factor, especially in this industry where it's relationship driven. I think having a good brand is really important. It's important to your clients. But it's more about when you're looking at it from an acquisition perspective, is it actually resulting in results? How do you suggest increasing client retention when acquiring clients of a solo advisor? Client retention to me is about delivering value for what the client is paying. And so, if you're incorporating that client well into your business, if you have a clear handoff, clients don't want to hear that they've been sold, right? There is no worse message to say that, hi, Jim sold you to me, I'm your new advisor. And I've seen advisors say that. And I know most people on this calls don't do that, but I think it's really important to have the conversation about how are we thinking about transition? So is the advisor joining and part of it? Is the advisor thinking of exiting the business? Is it the advisor has, me and so have been talking for months. We have very similar values. We like to work in the same way, articulating why you're the same value and telling the client why they want to work with you. And then demonstrating that, right? Most clients will listen to your value proposition. They will give you time. You then have to deliver on it. What can we do to protect ourselves or our firm from associates walking away with clients that we have paid to acquire, specific to Canadian law, since non-solicit, non-comps are not enforceable anymore? Correct. I do not believe that using legal matters to retain clients is the way to go. I believe that clients should be able to choose who they work for and what they do. At the end of the day, if the client sees you and your firm as the value and your system as the value, they are going to stay with you. If they see the individual associate as the value, you haven't done enough to create a valuable system. This gets back to some of the main themes that we talked about. If as a business, you are creating value under the overall umbrella, if different people and different roles in the organization are doing different processes and helping the client and multiple touch points, you are going to deepen that relationship. If it's just advisor works with client, advisor is going to be tied to that client. If you think about most other businesses, where you're able to show value as a firm, the client doesn't just follow because an employee left somewhere. And if the employee is that valuable, right, stop and think to yourself, if this employee can really take away meaningful assets from me, then you don't want to lose that employee. You want to think about how do you tie them in? How do you tie them in from an equity perspective? How do you tie them in from a relationship and development perspective? All of those things are factors. You really want to address those at the root instead of after the fact. Where can I find discretionary books for sale? So we had a conversation, I think, on the first seminar about this, but if you want to find books for sale, it's really about having clarity on what your value proposition is, right? What's the mission and vision of your firm? You should be able to articulate that, number one. Two, once you can articulate that, you want to get that out in front of people and let people know. The best way to find discretionary books is to be out in the market, participating in different associations, networking with advisors, reaching out on LinkedIn and just having coffee or lunch. Spending the time talking and building a network of advisors. If, too often advisors think of themselves as competitors who never should talk. The fact is there's so much blue space. You really want to develop that network and commit to time to really get to know people. What's a good way to calculate a revenue multiplier in the business that takes into account older clients? So, we do work on the valuation side, and we're happy to talk about different valuation methodology. But, I would just use some simple multiplier factors. If a book is predominantly old and you think it's going to run off fairly quickly, then the valuation is going to be lower, 10%, 15%, 25% lower. Do some exercises about saying, what if 30% of this book draws down over time? What's that impact, right? You've got to model out the revenue and do a couple what if scenarios. Once you get those, you'll have an understanding of your risk and where you've got to think about different ways of valuing that business. All right, it's 2:00, so we are right at time at 1 hour. I want to thank you all for taking the time. We'll continue to investigate these topics around business growth, M&A, and we look to have some advisors on the next couple calls who have gone through some of this to continue the conversation. Appreciate the time. Wish you the best, and if anyone has any other questions, feel free to reach out. Take care.